9 members are present. For the House Committee on Judiciary and Governmental Operations, Representative Edwin K. Probst,
Present.
Representative Christina M. E. Sablan,
Present.
Representative Donald M. Manglonia,
Present.
Representative Richard T. Lizama,
Present.
Representative Vicente C. Camacho,
Present.
Representative Blas Jonathan T. Attal,
Present.
Chairwoman Selena R. Babalta.
Presente.
Chairwoman, all 7 members are present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. With 9 members present from the Ways and Means Committee and 7 members present from JGO, we have a quorum, and so I hereby call this public meeting of the Ways and Means Committee and Judiciary and Governmental Operations Committee to order. Before we proceed with today's agenda, there was one item that was inadvertently excluded, and if there's no objections, I would like to include as item 2A and remunerate the subsequent letters on item 2 and each objections. Thank you, members, and I would like to take care of some housekeeping rules. This committee appreciates minimal distractions while in session and would appreciate it if everyone would engage actively in discussions and silence all electronic devices at this time. Thank you all for your cooperation. Additionally, the recording of this meeting by the Legislative Bureau Information Technology Division shall serve as the official journal should any legal issues arise. However, it does not relieve the legislative assistant, Mr. Cameron Nicholas, of his obligation and duty from taking detailed notes and producing a committee report. Let's take a short recess to take care of some of technical issues. We now rise back from recess. And at this time, the agenda for today's meeting was issued on December 6, 2022 in compliance with Public Law 18-41 as amended. At this time, may I get a motion from any member to adopt today's agenda as amended? All right, there's a motion to adopt today's agenda and it has been seconded. Any discussions on the motion? Those in favor of adopting today's agenda, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Today's agenda as amended has been duly adopted. Before moving on to today's public comments or statements from the members, I would like to state for the record the members of the Ways and Means Committee who are present in today's meeting, as well as the members of the JGO who are present today. I'd like to recognize the staff of the Legislative Bureau that is assisting the committee. We have our legal counsel, Joe Tyrone, our legislative assistants for both committees, Cameron Nicholas and Claire Sablan, our IT, Dell, and our Sergeant at Arms, Will. Now, before I open to the floor for public comments, I would like to remind those who wish to make comments that you have 5 minutes. The floor is now open for public comments. Please state your name and the entity you may represent.
Hello, yes. My name is Zaji Zadradahara. I'm sure that my name is familiar to you as it was in this very chamber that members of this once August body signed Sinamai House Resolution 2105, the sentiments of the foreign business community to term me a unwelcome person in America. And for what? Exposing how the CW visa program is but a form of human trafficking. But I digress. I'm here about the Boost program in general and related background as to the defrauding of and the discriminative distribution of the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, SLFRF program, a part of the American Rescue Plan program. A bit about my testimony. I have registered and successfully graduated from various federally mandated grant programs, the FEMA Grants Management Oversight Program, USAID, grant coursework, Native American Indian Grants Program, U.S. Department of Navy Small Business, PTAC courses, and various other federal non-senior management coursework regarding federal grant awards and programs. Presently, I'm the founder and CEO of an internationally recognized nonprofit in which we have both our SAMS.gov unique identity ID number, PAV6D 5RMEH3. We also have our NATO cage code number. I think we're the only ones here in the cinema that have that. SNEC 0. We are a nonprofit located both here in the Sinamai and in Yangon, Myanmar. As our nonprofit, we feed war-torn, displaced refugees and provide medical supplies, mosquito nets, etc. Under the ARPA CSL FRF nonprofit funds, our initial nonprofit proposals were submitted in February and March of 2022 under the Center FRF non-program, which is a FEMA, not a FEMA, but American Rescue Plan Act funds. These proposals have not been reviewed, the name of which is the Mariana Asian Trade Development Association proposal and the Mariana's Melanated Travel Development Association proposal. More recently, in November, we submitted up under our nonprofit the Afro Diaspora Arts and Mainland BIPOC Socioeconomic Contribution Center and Research Center for all those brothers and sisters that have been a part of the Sinamai, but is not made part of the record of the Sinamai. I have a question as to why these federal monies that were already allocated for small businesses and nonprofits were commingled into the Boost program. I also have a question why there was no actual application on the Department of Finance back in February and March. I then brought my concerns to, I don't know if she was a senator then, Edith Guerrero, and she asked David Adlig to answer some questions from his January the 7th, or I believe January the 9th, Saipan article where he states that he gave nonprofits, 10 or 11 nonprofits, funding from this CSFRF program when there was no applications, when no other nonprofits in the Sinamai were alerted to these funds. Again, in August, we had the Mariana's Business Pride event in which David Adley and Mr. Arroyo, John Arroyo, made some comments. And I asked them, I said to Mr. Arroyo, I said, Mr. Arroyo, why isn't there a chronology, some kind of record on the boost application porthole, a date and time, some kind of numeric uh, response to let the applicant know that their application was in chronological order? He laughed that off. I'm here today to ask this committee, why is it just focusing on the boost program when these monies have been defrauded from the American Rescue Program since 2020? Why is nobody asking who were the original 10 or 11 people that went to these special barbecues with David Adley and received funding? This was a part of fraud. This is federal fraud. Today, I believe the Bank of Saipan is going to come up here and say, hey, we didn't know anything about it. But I submitted a number of questions to John Arroyo directly back in, I believe, October, November. And I asked him about conflict of interest. And I asked him about why none of these monies had a nationality, some type of nationality question. Why
Excuse me,
none-
Mr. Zaji. I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap up, please.
That's all I got is 30 seconds?
You've already reached around 4 minutes.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So anyway, those are my nonprofits. We submitted a total of 8 proposals because there was no regulations. None of these proposals have been reviewed or awarded. So that's my question. I'm wondering the only reason that I've been denied is because the Senate has passed a law, not a law, but a House Resolution 2105 saying that I'm persona non grata. Therefore, I'm thinking I'm being denied access to these federal funds. I contacted the Department of Public Auditor, sent my public auditor, Genesis Cruz, nothing. I contacted the U.S. Department of Interior. They said they was looking into it. I contacted the U.S. Department of Treasury, and they gave me an auditor to look at my case. So I'm asking you guys, why were 8 proposals denied? Can you look into that? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Zaji. Just for the record, we do have your statements that you've emailed. If there are any additional statements you would like to include, please hand it over to our Sergeant at Arms. All right, thank you. Floor is still open. If there are no other public comments, we will now move on to the next item on the agenda. Item 3, witness testimony. At this time, I would like to thank all the individuals who have been called in as witnesses today. With respect to the Secretary of Finance, Mr. David Attelig, he has advised both committees on December 9th that he is off island and therefore the Joint Committee has rescheduled his appearance for December 21st at 10 a.m. We will grant no further extensions unless it is an emergency or beyond one's control. And at this time, we would like to thank Mr. John Arroyo, Mr. Jesus Taisagui, Mr. Edward De Leon Guerrero, Ms. Karen Callan for your time to come in today. But before you leave, we ask that you provide us with your cell phone number so that upon short notice, we will call you to return. You are reminded that you have not been dismissed and are still under subpoena. Today, we will begin with Mr. William Castro, the Chief of Staff to Governor Ralph Torres. Now, I would like to call on Mr. William Castro, Chief of Staff to the Governor, to come forward to be sworn in. Oh, sorry, William Castro. Good morning, Mr. Castro. Thank you for coming in today. At this time, can I ask you to please stand to allow our council to administer the oath?
Mr. Castro, please raise your right hand. State your name.
William M. Castro.
Do you solemnly swear, under the penalty of perjury, that the testimony you shall give in the matter at hand shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you, council. Thank you, Mr. Castro. And thank you for informing the committee of your efforts to search through your emails and WhatsApp messages, and we look forward to receiving them. We appreciate your appearance today, and so at this time, we'll begin with any of the members that, at this time, I recognize the Vice Chair for JGO, Vice Speaker Ato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Castro, and welcome to your House chamber. We'll start with some preliminary questions for you. Please state your name and position for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. My name is William M. Castro. I am the Chief of Staff and a member of the review panel for the Boost program.
Please describe your duties and responsibilities as Chief of Staff.
To provide general supervision and advice to the governor, and that supervision is limited to the governor's staff.
Thank you, Mr. Castro. What is the Boost program?
The Boost program, Mr. Speaker, is an initiative designed to revitalize the economy by providing federal relief funds to small businesses and nonprofits, and also fishers, farmers, and ranchers throughout the Commonwealth. It's a program that has directly benefited hundreds of companies and has directly impacted thousands of lives.
Thank you for that. How and when was the Boost program conceived?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. The program was initially conceived, I suspect, between November and January. November of 2021 as a concept in discussion with Governor Torres. The record will reflect, Mr. Speaker, whether it's Mr. Arroyo's submission or, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, my emails started to be recorded via email around February of this year. So the short answer would be between November and February in concept.
Thank you for that. What is the funding source for the Boost program?
The funding source is by the way, just for the members' benefit, I'm reciting from a September 23rd letter that was included in the Bank of Saipan's official response to this August body. I also want to state for the record that the authority on all fiscal matters relative to the Boost program is the Secretary of Finance, but I will, to the best of my ability and in the spirit of cooperation, attempt to respond to the best of my recollection and knowledge. So I'm referring to September 23rd, 2022, a letter by the Department of Finance Office of the Secretary, recorded as SFL 2022-219. It states here very clearly that the source of funding, at least with respect to this artifact, is the American Rescue Plan Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, otherwise known as ARPA or CSLFRF.
Thank you for that. How much funding was allocated for this program?
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker, for that question. And again, I stand to be corrected by the Secretary of Finance, who's not here, or any other authority on these matters. But I am privy to information, again, referring to September 23rd and a subsequent letter thereafter, December 1st. All of you should have a copy of this. Also by the Secretary of Finance from the Department of Finance, stating that an additional $6 million, in addition to the $11 million, has been appropriated, or I don't know what the technical term is, has been allocated to the Boost program with the same funding source. So in summation, that would bring us to approximately $17 million to the best of my knowledge.
All right, thank you for that. Who decided how much funding to allocate?
That's a great question, Mr. Speaker. That's beyond the realm of my knowledge. I would suspect based on what I believe to be true and correct, that the Secretary of Finance is the authorized signatory for and on behalf of the Chief Executive of the Commonwealth. So I would have to assume, although I stand to be corrected, that it would be the Secretary upon the advice and consent of the Governor. Just to be clear, I don't have that authority, so certainly it's not me.
All right, thank you for that. And just with the boost program, obviously with ARPA funds that was distributed, one of the main concerns during the budget process was that there was a spending plan, and I'm assuming that the additional $6 million from the $10 million is outside of the spending plan, so they have to reprogram some ARPA funds.
I can't
You-
speak to the assumption, Mr. Speaker, but
All right.
thank you for making that reference.
All right, thank you. So next question, with respect to the boost program, briefly describe your primary role and responsibilities just to the boost program.
Sure, absolutely. I am a member of the review panel. My job, as I understand it to be, would be to review the submissions, or what's otherwise referred to as the applications, and to confer with my colleagues who also sit on the review panel in order that we may be in a sound position to make a recommendation of a list of applicants for review and approval by the Governor.
All right, thank you for that. What is Bank of Saipan's role in the boost program?
The Bank of Saipan is the authorized administrator of the Boost program.
Why was a third-party administrator needed for the boost program?
Great question. I can only share what I recollect from my experience. If you go back, I think the record will also reflect, Mr. Speaker, and please tell me if you want me to stop, that initially the Boost program was conceived as a low to no interest bearing loan program that would be administered through one or more banking institutions in the Commonwealth. Upon further review, and thanks to the due diligence of the Secretary of Finance, he received feedback based on my discussion with him, I believe this to be true, from the United States Department of the Treasury. And under no circumstance shall these funds be used to subsidize a loan of any kind. That was the genesis of engaging one or more banks. Then we figured that it would make great sense as a matter of quality control to have an extended party outside of the office of the Governor, primarily to be a part of the process for the purposes of vetting and ensuring that the applications or the applicants in this regard are in compliance with the basic requirements as outlined in the Boost program. So to the best of my knowledge, that was my basic understanding, and it made good sense at the time, and I think it still makes good sense now.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A year from now.
Thank you, Rep. Mata. I recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Castro. You mentioned various elements of the Boost program, so businesses, nonprofits, farmers, fishers, and ranchers. What about workforce development?
Yes, ma'am. So there is currently an initiative underway known as the Boost Workforce Development Program. It hasn't fully been made manifest. I understand it is, to the best of my knowledge and understanding, that this week they are training, I think, the first dozen of 50 applicants who may be employed through these Boost funds, or as I cited more accurately, the ARPA CSL FRF funds, and placed into the private sector to provide further assistance to small businesses or nonprofits.
Mhm.
So there is a workforce development program being piloted at the moment, ma'am.
But the source of funding is the same,
I believe that to be true, yes.
and the so the amount that's been allocated for the workforce development part of the Boost program is how much?
If I had to surmise based on my knowledge and understanding, it's under $500,000 at this point in time. I just want to also state, by the way, good morning and thank you for the welcome, Congresswoman Sablan. I just want to further state for the record again, it's important to impress upon this body that the authority in all fiscal matters rests with the Secretary of Finance. But again, I will, in the spirit of cooperation, attempt to answer the questions to the best of my ability, in good faith.
Do you have a role in this workforce development program?
Great question. Other than being a member of the panel, no, and just maybe a guide on the side,
Mhm.
providing input when solicited, imparting my experiences with respect to rolling this out, as I have with the basic boost program.
Okay, so there's a review panel for all of those elements: businesses, nonprofits, farmers, fishers, ranchers, workforce development.
Sure, yes, there is.
Okay, are there any other elements of the Boost program that you haven't mentioned yet?
Actually, there is another element that I haven't been asked, and I'd be more than happy to speak to it. Also in concept at this point in time would be the boost, for the lack of a formal term, it's still conceptual, a boost small business center. And the concept is that these beneficiaries of the boost program and others who may benefit from this venue and the services and products provided therein may avail themselves of it. So if I could just for a moment share the idea. So the concept is you have this venue, whether it's at the Hakapatan building or adjacent to the Bank of Saipan or some other venue decided by the proper authorities. The concept would be there would be a central conference room, state-of-the-art facility. And if you use the Hakapatan building, just so we can affix some kind of an object there, the right side would contain the small businesses that could use that subsidized rent to co-locate and co-share. Conceptually, still in conceptual stages. On the left side would be the nonprofits, and you don't have to be a boost beneficiary. But I think the value added to this discussion and concept is the notion that in the back of the room, in the back of the Hakupatan building, or any facility that suits the needs of the authority in charge at the time the decisions will be made, there are persons who are, or entities that are subject matter experts for which they may impart technical advice for free, little to no charge, such as accountants, tax specialists, strategic planners, and other types of elements that would help shore up or strengthen the foundation of especially new businesses. That idea, I could say, I can attribute came to my from a discussion with the Department of Commerce and other staff from another entity, citing time and time again the number one reason why small businesses fail. It's because of the lack of technical support. Now, I'm not a subject matter expert, but taking that into consideration, that was the notion behind this Small Business Development Center, the
Okay.
Boost Small Business Development Center.
Thank you, Mr. Castro.
You're
So, just going back to Vice Speaker's earlier question, the total amount of funding allocated for all of these various sub-programs under Boost is $17 million.
You're asking me, that's correct.
Is that correct?
That's what I believe to be correct based on these two artifacts submitted by the Bank of Saipan.
Thank you. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Vice?
Just to follow up back with the Chair Tina Sablan's question regarding the source of funding. The original source is $10 million. Then they had requested, or $11 million. Then they requested $6 million. Then there's an additional request of $20 million that shall be reserved for the Boost program. Is that a clear understanding? Is that part of the discussions with the Secretary of Finance? Because the Secretary of Finance himself has came out asking for an additional $20 million. So that's a total of $37 million to the Boost program.
For the record, a former speaker, that's news to me, and I think that's great news. If in fact that was the executive will to infuse an additional 20 million, regardless of who the sitting governor is, it would be a tremendous benefit to this community. So I'm not privy to that. I can't say yes or no, but my reaction would be that's a great thing.
Well, this is very important to understand because the Ways and Means members are here, the chairman of Ways and Means, and one of the biggest issue that came in the Ways and Means discussions was that there's an actual spending plan already that had been approved by U.S. Department of Treasury. Therefore, now we're rediverting funds within our local level without going back to the U.S. Department of Treasury and getting the proper, I guess, guidelines or approval from the U.S. Department of Treasury. So we're moving an additional $27 million of the spending plan that was presented to the Ways and Means Committee and the Conference Committee during the deliberation of the 2023 budget. And that was a big concern that we had in the committee level. Therefore, we went with the proposal that was agreed upon between the two houses and the governor himself. So, I mean, just for the record, Mr. Chairman, I want that to be stated for the record that there's a spending plan, but in that same breath, there's a moving of an additional $27 million that has not been approved by the U.S. Department of Treasury. I yield my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I recognize the Vice Chair, Rep. Magofnia.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome again, Mr. Castro. Just real quick before I start on my questions, can we go back to your statement where you said initially there was a design, there was an initial design for Boost, and I wanted to inquire whether or not there's been any deviations from that initial plan?
Good morning and congratulations, Senator-elect. Just for clarification, so the initial concept are you referring to, like the initials helping small businesses and nonprofits? And then, and forgive me because I was fumbling with this. And the second part of the question is, has there been a deviation from the initial design? I wouldn't characterize it as a deviation. I would characterize it as building upon the initial foundation. All of these elements had been previously discussed in concept and continue to be formatively designed, if you will, until there's a workable framework that's acceptable, that is perhaps could be funded. And so the short answer, if I was to provide a yes or no, would be yes, but I wouldn't characterize it as a deviation. I would characterize it as building upon the initial foundation, ma'am, because it was part of the vision, if you would, if I could attribute that word to it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. As the developments were taking place, were the people involved in that program recording any of the changes as changes were being made?
Yeah, the short answer to that would be yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And I again, Mr. Chairman, I do apologize, and I think Mr. Tyrone is a beneficiary of my 4 a.m. and my 12 a.m. and my whatever a.m. I have 300 of the probably 1,200 pages I need to provide to the body. Again, I beg your indulgence, co-chair, Senator-elect. I meant no disrespect. I actually misunderstood. We can talk about that if you'd like. But the point being, the email record will reflect to a large extent the iterative discussions via email by and between myself and other members of the panel. You will see very clearly as a matter of public record, once I turn this is like 300 pages. I'd like to give you the full record this afternoon, but if you want to make a copy.
Thank you.
my-
Sergeant Arms, please.
yeah, you're welcome. And so my point would be, yes, it is being recorded in its iteratively in its basic stages, and you're going to see that even in the rubric and the discussion on how best to proceed. And that's why it took a little while for the Boost program to be rolled out. We were wanting to make sure it was sound enough and can pass muster, if you will, Senator-elect.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Green. I recognize Rep. Probst.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chief of Staff, Will Castro, for joining us today. Just wanted to ask the $6 million that was added. When was that added? Do you know what date that was?
First of all, good morning, Congressman Probst.
Good morning.
Good morning, Pari. It was, I don't know when it was added, sir. I do know that a December 11th letter reflects an award, to be precise, of $6 million. Again, and I mean no disrespect, I'd like to state for the public record once again that the Secretary of Finance would be the best source for any questions relative to these fiscal matters associated with Boost.
Okay, and thank you, and you did mention that earlier, but because you are involved in this, have a lot of investment of your time and efforts to developing this Boost program, we do ask this of you, and then we'll yield to the Finance Secretary when he comes in.
Yes, sir.
For his testimony. But for the meantime, the numbers that we were getting, there were, because they were in the papers, by the way, and all over the media during the election, you couldn't go like 10 minutes without seeing something mentioned about Boost. It was actually every single day, and that's great. It was letting everybody know about it. But getting back to that, the numbers that we were looking at and that were mentioned earlier was that there were 241 businesses that were awarded to the sum of about $10.4 million. Is that number accurate, or is that what you have?
That's what I believe to be true, sir.
All right. So that was the amount, and then the program was extended correct? It was extended for others to apply.
Yes, sir. I
Okay.
think on 2 occasions.
Okay, on 2 occasions. And they went ahead and applied. And from the information that we got that was put into the press and forwarded around was that there were well over 1,500 applicants. Is that correct?
Perhaps at the time that was published, but to the best of my knowledge, there are 4,000 total applications
So more
for the
than.
entire Boost program,
Right.
all elements of the Boost
Okay.
program.
Well, for specifically for small businesses, I guess that's what we're looking for. But nonetheless, that's even more than that you have to review. But the concern that has been brought up by many is that you've already spent close to $11 million on the Boost program. That uh, the numbers had changed. At one time we were told it was 8 million. I think it was posted it was then 10 million, then 12 million. I guess that increased, and now we're being told it was increased by 6 million, or up to $17 million. The concern is that if there are 241 that were awarded these boost grants, these are the first to get them, right? You guys were out there putting them out in Saipan, and Rhoda. Now we have very limited funds, very limited, extremely limited. If you look at the fact that 241 businesses got relatively $11 million, and if let's just say there's still, and there's probably less than that, let's say there's still 5 million left, and you have 3,000 or whatever it is applicants. If you just simply look at the numbers, how much is actually left for these business applicants, and why would why would it be extended if the ask or if the amounts were already way over what could possibly be ever invested in these businesses? That's my first question. Thank you.
Those are great questions, Congressman. I don't believe I'm in a good position to crunch the numbers and give you an answer that may satisfy the body. But I also look at it this way. If in fact what the former speaker had mentioned, that there will be an additional $27 million, if we assume that to be true, I look at it at doubling, if not tripling, the amount of the awards over the same period of time. If in fact what the assumption or what's being posited by your question, framed by your question, is also correct, then logic would dictate that there would be a very finite pool of businesses that may qualify. But I'm in no position to argue one way or the other without knowing full well what the fiscal authority may have in mind or in writing. I could only share my thoughts, and my thoughts are this: I think it's a fine investment into the community, whether it's $1 or $100 million, and that's just my opinion. And I don't mean to be offensive. I don't even mean to be too subjective. I just don't have enough information about the fiscal state of affairs associated with either the government or the program.
And thank you. No offenses taken. We're here to have answers provided to us for the benefit of our constituents, most especially all those businesses that have not received any boost grant whatsoever. And they have been very concerned about that. We've had numerous complaints about receiving a phone call, an update from somebody working at Boost that admits to them that they just had been hired, and their principal job, was to tell persons that they're here to just give you, to let you know that you did not, get approved yet, but it's still in process or something like that. But they couldn't answer their questions. So there's reason for us being here to get the answers that we are looking for. I just wanted to ask with regard to your role. You mentioned earlier that you're one of the review panelists. That's correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And
Excuse
and-
me, Rep. Probst. May I ask everyone, all the members and the witness included, please to speak louder?
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, you have a microphone, but it echoes off the wall. So please, all members and the witness, please speak louder into the microphones.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me position it. Thank you, Chair. The with regard to your position as a member of this review panel, a question earlier asked from Representative Atau was that the Bank of Saipan's role the boost program was, which would you answer? They are administrator of the boost program, and that this third party administrator was needed. You explained to us why. Um, the just so for clarification, they are the administrator, but you are the one of the panelists, and they make a recommendation to you and the other panelists, and then you subsequently make the decision on who receives the money. I'm sorry, which companies are awarded.
Uh, no. If I could, Congressman, maybe share what I believe to be the process, and the record, I should hope, would reflect the same. First of all, with your previous point, those are valid points. And on behalf of the Boost program, I do apologize, Congressman, and to members of the listening audience, if your questions were not adequately satisfied or addressed in the phone call. I apologize. With respect to the role of the bank, the role of the panel, and the role of the governor, I believe this to be the process. An application is submitted to the Bank of Saipan, whether it'll be online or at any of its physical locations on any of the three islands, Rota, Tinian, and Saipan. From there, the bank, in its role as an administrator, would conduct a review and affix a checklist, usually at the top of the packet, that would be subsequently indexed if they had provided, I believe it's 5 elements, forgive me, I don't have it in front of me. Each of those elements are as follows to the best of my knowledge: a letter of intent, a business profile, a business plan, a certificate of existence, which is not always the case for in every instance. I believe that a sole proprietor may be exempt from this, but I stand to be corrected. And to the best of my knowledge, a tax clearance form. Assuming that that's done at the bank's level, they then take this application and enter it into a ledger. And this ledger will reflect the same. Usually, the ledger, as your record will reflect, is submitted by the administrator, specifically Mr. Arroyo in his capacity as the president of the Bank of Saipan, will reflect the date of submission, the name of the entity that has applied, the amount requested, and each of the respective categories with an X if it had been satisfied, meaning there is an artifact or a piece of evidence that meets that criterion. Thereafter, the list is transmitted or provided to members of the panel. And I can only speak for myself. This instrument is used as a guide so that you may conduct your due diligence and, upon your election, review the respective packets so that you can make a determination based upon your individual review of what may or may not be considered. Thereafter, it may be further determined by the panel through a consensus, whether it's unanimous consent or by a simple majority of 2 of the 3 members of the panel, to advance that the application to be included in the list that would thereafter be submitted to the governor for his ultimate approval. For the record, that's the best of my recollection as to what the process is.
So basically, what you've said in short form or summary is that they basically give you a synopsis or a snapshot of it, and you guys look at it, and then you decide, okay, this sounds good, right? And you present it to the governor.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
That sounds like a pretty
Okay.
accurate description, summation of my process.
Thank you. I just wanted that for the record so that everyone that is watching understands the process behind this. Okay. At this time, no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Ropes. Floor is now open to any other members. I recognize Rep. Vicente Camacho.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Mr. Castro.
Good morning, for Sergeant.
Before I go through my line of questioning, I want to clarify something real quick. Earlier, you had mentioned something about low or no interest bearing. So the question is, is this money a grant or a loan?
The Boost program is a grant program.
Thank you for that. So, how did the Bank of Saipan get the contract to administer this program?
That's a good question. I know I've been a part of the discussions early on when we had engaged the bank, even on the conceptual stages of how best to proceed should the program be rolled out in the form of a low or no interest bearing loan. Now, let me qualify by saying I'm not a banker, so forgive me if I get the words wrong, but that's how they were initially engaged. Based on my understanding and my role and my contribution to the discussion, they have the infrastructure, the necessary subject matter expertise infrastructure of accountants and other professionals that are in the best possible position, at least better than I am, without a doubt, to conduct the due diligence and ensure that there is a third party to be able to ensure that the basic requirements are met or at least somewhat vetted. That now to your question, like who decides that they get the contract? To the best of my knowledge, the only authority that can make that determination would be the Secretary of Finance. Even in my capacity as Chief of Staff to the Governor, I do not have that authority.
Thank you for that. Now, so was there a request for proposal?
I do not know, Congressman.
Okay, thank you for that. So why Bank of Saipan? Obvious, earlier you had answered that question.
Well, that was my perspective on why I would have
Right.
chosen Bank of Saipan, but
Okay, so
but I
let
could,
me ask you a question. Why not Bank of Wall?
I don't know the answer to that. I would suspect that the best person to answer that would be the Secretary of Finance. Just for the record, okay, I think the Bank of Guam will be just as good. As a matter of fact, that was an early discussion. If it was a low to no interest bearing loan, that there will be a consortium of banks. At least that was discussed among ourselves. I just want to state for the record, there is no attempt to discriminate or otherwise remove other participants. But I am not in the best person to answer as to how they got the contract and why.
Okay, so with that question, why Bank of Saipan? So maybe the follow up question to that is, were these funds already being held in Bank of Saipan?
That's a great question. I don't believe that to be the case, but I could stand corrected. I'm operating in good faith, and most of my knowledge and source of information comes from the record as submitted by the Bank of Saipan, and that's why I was respectfully requesting that I be given an opportunity to see the record. So, because he's the authority as the administrator on these matters, so I don't know the answer to that question, Congressman, Representative.
Okay, thank you. So, who made the decision to award the contract to Bank of Saipan?
Great question, and thank you for asking it another way. My answer is consistent. I don't know who the ultimate decision-making authority was in this respect. I don't know.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you have a personal relationship with Bank of Saipan?
Could you define personal?
Personal as in maybe your friends, buddies, associates?
I have a personal relationship with you and most members of the body. I know Mr. Arroyo. I am not, for the record, this is very important. This is very important because I need to state for the record that I in no way have any special relationship with Mr. Arroyo as the president of the bank, either through filial relationship, through business relationship. I have a personal relationship with a member of the body here as my party, but that's even closer than what I have with the president. So depending on how you characterize personal, if you're asking me if Mr. Arroyo is my friend, absolutely. If you're asking me if I have a business or filial relationship, may the record reflect absolutely not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Camacho. Floor is now open for other members. I recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question on Rep. Camacho's line. So I understand that you said you didn't make the decision to award the contract, but did you recommend that the contract be awarded to Bank of Saipan?
I can't recall, to the best of my knowledge, having said, assuming for a minute that, assuming this to be true, that the Secretary of Finance is the decision-making authority for and on behalf of the Chief Executive on behalf of the Commonwealth. I do not recall, to the best of my knowledge, having said, let's give Bank of Saipan the contract. I can tell you for the record that however the way the decision was made, assuming it's legal and ethical, that they have done an outstanding job, and I stand by that decision without fear of contradiction.
Thank you. And do you have a personal relationship with any of the owners of the Bank of Saipan?
For the record, I don't even know who the owners are. Could you enlighten me?
Thank you. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Milan. Any other members? I recognize Vice Chair Rep. McGoffin.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome again, Mr. Castro. I believe the question was already asked, but I'll ask anyway,
Please.
just to be sure. So prior to the Boost program, did you have a personal relationship with Mr. John Arroyo, the president of Bank of Saipan?
Thank you for the question. Assuming, is probably bad on my part to assume, and may I ask you how you define personal?
Sure. So pretty much how Rep. Camacho defined personal relationships. So a friend, an associate, or just
Thank you. Again, for the record, I consider Mr. John Arroyo, president of the Bank of Saipan, to be my friend. For the record again, Mr. John Arroyo, president of the Bank of Saipan, is not my associate, is in, at least to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe we're filial related. Maybe if we did the research somewhere along the line, but we don't. If you're asking me if we hang out and we have a good personal bond and we sip on whiskey, I don't mean to be sarcastic. I'm trying to understand the question beyond the friendship, because it's a very low threshold for me personally and professionally. But I don't hang out with John. We don't hang out at the beach. If we have if we're like in the same soccer club. The extent of my relationship with Mr. Arroyo is I've run into him in professional circles. I would be honored if I was related to him. But even if I was, it wouldn't have had a bearing on my decision, because I have a tremendous relationship. I didn't make this, my subjective understanding of their performance. It would not have changed, because I have, to use the same definition of friendship, a very good friendship, a personal relationship based on your definition, with Mr. Phil Flores and with Miss the Honorable Lourdes Leangro as well.
great. Thank you for that answer. Prior to the Boost program, did you have a personal relationship with the owners of Bank of Saipan?
I gotta say, for the record, I honestly do not. First of all, I don't even know if we mean owners by stakeholders, or we mean owners like, do they own the bank? I don't even know what the corporate composition of the. I don't know who owns the bank. Members of the board. I'd like to know who they are, but I wouldn't know unless somebody could go line by line and tell me who the corporate board members are and or owners. Based on my knowledge, I don't even know who they are. I mean, I could suspect that, but I've been advised by counsel not to guess. And so if someone can enlighten me, we can go down line by line and I can answer yes or no.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for that answer. Have you ever showed any favoritism toward Bank of Saipan?
Could you define favoritism, like opening a bank account? Because I opened an account there.
So favoritism as in preferential treatment, or
To the best of my knowledge, no.
okay. So Cam, could you pull up exhibit?
This will be marked as Exhibit 1.
Okay, so if you wouldn't mind looking at the screen, this is a text message between yourself and I believe Kent maybe. And could you help us understand maybe what you meant by "I don't forget my friends"?
Sure, absolutely.
Eh,
Those who know me well may probably attest to the fact that if you've left a favorable impression upon me and my family, if you treated us equal-handedly and with due respect and accord, that I will forever, unless otherwise abrogated, forever hold you in the highest regard and esteem. That applies to you too, Senator-elect. We have never had a difference of opinions, notwithstanding our political positions that just passed. I consider John Arroyo, president of the Bank of Saipan, my friend. I've had positive exchanges with him in the past, but to be clear, I've never been to his house. I don't think he's ever been to my house. We don't run in the same social circles, and I do consider him a friend. But no, if I may so express, that friendship in no way has been translated as overt advocacy to award him or the institution he represents a contract for and on behalf of the Boost program. That's how I would characterize that. Uh, if you'd like me to further elaborate, Mr. Arroyo, to the best of my experience, personal and professional, has been an upstanding professional. And I've always appreciated the due respect he's afforded me, notwithstanding the stature in this and in Guam that he holds in this community. That means a lot to me when you can treat someone, given your stature, with tremendous humility and respect. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. Based on the text correspondence between yourself and Karen, Miss Karen, would you at least agree that this communication gives the appearance of favoritism, perhaps?
No, I wouldn't. For the record, I didn't know Karen, just so we can have this discussion because she's listed there. I didn't know Karen prior to the Boost program. And no, I would suspect, by the way, if we could, if you would afford me the privilege to speak to the issue of I got your back, please get mine. I'm new to this discussion in a banking context. I'm sure I've made mistakes or I've tripped up myself. And so the inference there would be please, to the best of your ability, ensure that we are in compliance with whatever is required, federal, local statute, even the intent and the spirit of the program. That's what that means. You don't, doesn't mean anything sinister like I'm doing something terribly wrong. We're trying to do none of that. So, no, I don't share the sentiment that it means that I forgot the word that was used. I am favoritism, that there is favoritism. That's the quote unquote, to use your word, ma'am. I don't agree.
Recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, I would like to read into the record the text messages that Representative McGoffney was referencing. So this is from November 18, 2022, between 7:50 and 7:52 a.m. So Ms. Callan says, "Good morning. Thank you for including Bank of Saipan in the Boost program. We've gotten a lot of exposure since then and a long line today." And then Mr. Castro replies, "Yup, I don't forget my friends. John has been good to me in the past. So, and now I met you. I got your back. Watch mine." Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Rep. McGoffney, you still have the floor.
Yes. Thank you for that, Rep. Sablan. One last question. Was there any written process for reviewing the Boost applications?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rep. McGoffney. I recognize the co-chair.
Thank you, Chairman Mangonia. Mr. Castro, text records obtained from the Bank of Saipan reflect that many of your friends and family and associates or associates from businesses in Guam were awarded from the Scene of My Boost program. Did you profit in any way?
May the record reflect my succinct answer? No. But if I may, for purposes of clarification, could a member of this body indicate to me, in fair conduct, which member of my family has benefited from a Boost Award? Because I would challenge, not necessarily you, Senator-elect, I would challenge the assumption based on the written record that no member of my family has been awarded a Boost Award. I don't think any member of my family even applied. And should they have, that shouldn't be a basis for discrimination, not to fully and faithfully consider them. But again, I'm very curious as to which member of my family had applied and benefited. The assumption, the assertion that came from the presiding officers was that family, associates, and friends. Now I can handle associates and friends. It's a loose term. I just finished characterizing how John's my friend, but I'm really not certain who my quote unquote family would be, and I would have to assume that my family in this forum, notwithstanding the colloquial hey par, hey brud, that my family in this context is defined as a filial relationship or a blood lineage relationship, usually restricted to immediate siblings, parents, and perhaps children. So I would respectfully request, for the record, since we're having an open discussion, because I don't want the listening audience or any member of this august body to have that assumption, because I don't even know. And it would be very enlightening to me. I've heard a lot of enlightening things that are factual, at least posited as factual, that I didn't even know. So, for my own protection, legal and otherwise, could somebody tell me which member of my family had applied?
Would you consider in-laws to be family?
Let the record reflect I'm not married. So that would, you can define that any way you want, Madam Senator elect. But could you please indulge me with which in-law had applied?
We'll
Assuming
get
I'm
to
married.
that.
Okay.
There's a portion of that. Thank
Okay.
you for clarifying that.
Yes, ma'am.
But we'll get to it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, co-chair. Any other member? I recognize Rep. Joel Camacho.
Morning, Mr. Castro.
Off a day, Congressman.
Morning. Just a quick question. How much was, because I know that we have to submit a spending plan to U.S. Treasury. Is that correct?
To the best of my knowledge, yes, sir.
For the usage of ARPA. So I'm just wondering how much was set aside for the small business development program?
I can't speak to the broad question, Congressman, in terms of small business development program, but
Or the
based on,
boost program?
yeah, so based on what has been made available to me, sir, the two artifacts that I referred to was a September and a December letter authored by the Secretary of Finance, which totals about $17 million.
17.
That's what I got. Yes, sir.
Okay, so pretty much that was the prior submission proposed to U.S. Treasury that we were gonna spend that amount for the boost program.
Could you repeat the question? The first part, I have
Because-
problems with the first part. I mean, 'cause I don't think I understood the first part.
No, because you recently mentioned that an additional 6 million was pumped into the boost program. I'm just wondering. I'm just kind of confused by that because don't we have to amend the spending plan whenever we change the usage of allocation of ARPA? Don't we have to have U.S. Treasury have a say in that?
I don't have the answer to that question. And just for the record, Congressman, I didn't say it was infused. Mr. Atalik said it was infused, and I'm simply reciting a copy of the record.
Okay. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep.
Thank you, Mr.
Camacho. Any other member? Recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you. You responded to Representative Magofnia that there is a written process for reviewing boost applications. Where is that written process
Sure. So,
available?
thank you. So, to the best of my knowledge, there, in one or more occasions in Mr. Arroyo's record, it accurately reflects, to my understanding, the process by which we are guided in terms of I believe I walked it through earlier, receipt, preparation of a ledger for review, conducting a due diligence to ensure compliance with having met each of the specific criterion or submissions, and then open deliberation, and then an advancement of a list. That is what I understand. And then it goes up to the governor and back down to the bank to promulgate or to process. That's my understanding. And it's, forgive me, I don't have it readily available, but I'm going to assume it's, I know it's here. I've
Yeah.
seen it.
I've seen what you're referring to as
Yes,
well in the correspondence
Yes,
that
ma'am.
was submitted. So that's what you were referring to. That's the written process for reviewing boost applications is in the back and forth emails.
No, I think there's the short answer is yes, it is contained in the back and forth emails, but we could take a short recess and I could look for the explicit articulation of what's required of the panel.
I guess what I'm also asking is that written process published anywhere where members of the community could also see how applications are being reviewed?
Now, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if it's been put on a poster, ma'am, but I know it's been, or I mean,
the
public or
website?
put out there in the open.
Mhm.
But I do know it's readily available to members of the panel. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I yield at this time.
Thank you, Rep. Sabran. I recognize Rep. Probst.
Thank you, Chairman. So moving on, Mr. Castro, Chief of Staff Castro, let's go back to the review panel. You had mentioned yourself, of course, as a review, one of the panelists. Review panelists, is that the correct terminology?
I think it means the same thing. I'm following you, sir.
All right. I apologize too. I want to make sure we're using the proper lingo. So review, you are a Boost review panelist, a member, right? And could you tell me, I'm sorry, who are the other review panel members?
Sure. Excuse me. Yes. So members of the review panel constitute a representative of the office of the governor, a representative of the Department of Finance, and a representative of the Department of Commerce.
Thank you. And could I have their names, please?
Yes, sir. Myself, William Castro, as Chief of Staff. I am
Okay.
the representative of the Office of the Governor.
Okay.
Secretary of Finance, David Atalik, is a representative of the Department of Finance. Former Congressman and Secretary of Commerce is the representative for the Department of Commerce. However, on occasion, he does assign Mr. Taisawi to serve as his proxy when he is unable to meet the meetings or otherwise.
I'm sorry, you're talking about the Director of Commerce or Secretary of Commerce? Or?
Secretary of Commerce from time to time will assign Mr. Jesus Taisagui, who I believe his title is Director of Business Development. And yes, sir, he is a subordinate to the Secretary in the Department of Commerce.
And my apologies again. So just
okay.
for the record, it's you, Dave Atalig, Secretary of Finance, and Jesus Taisagui from the Department of Commerce.
No, sir. For the record, it's myself, David Atalik, and Ed De Leon Guerrero.
Ed De Leon Guerrero.
Yes, sir.
But sometimes Jesus Taisagui.
Sometimes Jesus Taisagui will fill in for Mr. De Leon Guerrero. Yes,
so
sir.
he's fills in for him. Okay.
Yes, sir.
But you've worked with him. He's been a panelist with you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Who else?
Just those names to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, so what happens when there has to be, because I know that you had just mentioned that you don't have any family involved in this with regard to applications or whatever, but in our islands that there are a lot of relationships, right? And there are familial relations. So of course, in the chance that there is a conflict of interest because the person applying is maybe is related closely or something in terms of a relationship or works with this person and they feel there's a conflict, do they opt out to decide on these particular applications?
Yes, Pari, you are correct.
So
There
it does
are
happen.
close relationships with one or more members of this community. To answer your question, do they opt out?
Yes.
Yes. I have been present when one or more members have elected to recuse themselves from opining or otherwise recommending one or more entities for inclusion on the list to be forwarded to the governor.
Because perhaps the person was an agent for one of the applicants, right? That's possible. So they would say, I can't be a part of this. I'm going to step out.
I don't recall the reason.
But what if you found out later that there was a very obvious conflict of interest and this person actually voted or supported this company? Would you be concerned on that decision that person went ahead and did not make this public, that he had a particular relationship with the applicant? Or would you think that's acceptable?
You're asking my opinion?
I'm asking your opinion.
If in fact what you're positing is true, that this in a hypothetical situation, a member of the panel was an officer
Mhm.
or otherwise an
A
owner.
panelist. We
I'm
do
al-
have that on record.
Yeah, well, hold on, I'm almost there. Actually, you're,
Yeah.
you're,
I'm just getting ahead, but I'm giving
I-
you a little foreshadow.
I know. I've just a
That's
little.
my party. There you go. Little foreshadow for your par.
Stumpy par. So just forgive me. I don't mean to. I'm just trying to walk this through. I want to be precise here because this is a subjective situation, not based on fact, but supposition of assuming what you're positing is true and correct. So this member who is a panelist
Hmm.
is also a member of an entity in an official capacity, either on the board.
Or an agent of the company or
What?
business.
Okay, this is a new. Okay, I don't mean to split hairs, but it's
Mhm.
important. Like the question about, am I his friend? Are we related?
No, I was just asking, do
No,
you
no.
think there
My
would be a
question,
conflict of interest? And if so, what are
Congressman.
the standards put in? Are they supposed to recuse themselves? Do you have that in some sort of writing? How about that? That you should recuse yourself if there are conflicts of interest. Is that listed anywhere?
So those are like four questions. Could I take the first one?
Sure, go ahead.
The question was if this individual was an agent of
Mhm.
an entity that ultimately was a beneficiary
Yes.
of a boost award. Could you define agent? Because ultimately was a beneficiary
Yes.
of a boost award. Could you define agent? Because I don't have an understanding of agent.
A person that is an agent for a company that is working on behalf of the company, looking out for the company, maybe getting a payment or some sort of. You don't know what an agent is for businesses?
The technical definition I don't, just like I
Okay.
didn't know what your definition, the body's definition of friendship was, or
Okay.
relationship.
Well,
So I just want to be clear because there are legal implications to whoever is being discussed as this
I gave
Yeah.
the example as an agent. Doesn't have to be an agent.
So let me put it
Let's
this
get
way.
back to.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Let me ask the questions. then.
Mr.
I'm sorry.
Congressman.
Don't. Point
Congressman,
of order. Point of order. I have the floor. I'm asking you a
is
question.
that how
now.
this works?
Yes, it does work that way. And I'm going to ask you a simple question, okay? If there is a conflict of interest, okay, is there some sort of standard, something that you and your fellow panelists have discussed, where you must recuse yourself if there happens to be a conflict of interest because of working relationships or maybe personal relationships? I'm just asking, has that ever come up? And is there something that is written on that?
Thank you and forgive me.
Thank you.
I was attempting to respond to the first question. To the last question, I don't have enough information to say yes or no.
Okay, so has there ever been during the hundreds, if not thousands, of applications that you and your fellow panelists have reviewed that no conflicts of interest have ever come up? I'm just wondering.
That's a different question.
It's a question that I'm asking right now.
Could you restate the question for the record?
Let
And
me
give me
restate
the
the question
opportunity
for
to
you.
respond.
Okay, how would you like me to put this?
The same way you did last time,
I
Congressman.
will do that for you.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the thousands of applications that you and your fellow panelists have reviewed, have conflicts of interest ever arose? Have there ever been conflicts of interest where a panelist is conflicted out because of a familial relationship or perhaps a working relationship? Has there ever been any conflicts of interest with all of the applications that you guys have reviewed?
If it would benefit the body, let me answer this simply, and I hope it applies universally. Yes, there have been one or more occasions where a member of the panel has decided to recuse himself because of a perceived conflict of interest for whatever reason. I don't know if it's familial or otherwise, but yes.
All right, thank you. And when that does happen and that person or the panelist steps out, do you get another panelist to come in, or does it just is the decision made with just the remaining panelists, such as yourself, Secretary of Finance, and either Secretary Ed De Leon Guerrero or his filler in Jesus Taisagui?
Based on my experience, we would proceed with the membership as is.
Okay, so no one is added. So there's no one else that basically, so it's just, as you mentioned earlier, just you that, and these members that we mentioned earlier who make these final decisions. That's what's been stated. So I thank you for that. I do have a few more questions, but because of the sake of time, I'll yield for now. Thank you, Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Rep.
You're welcome.
Probst. Any other members? I recognize Rep. Sablan.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to just ask for some clarification on why a review panel was necessary. Could you speak
That's-
to that?
Absolutely, I can give you my perspective, and I appreciate the question because it was discussed thoroughly from the inception. To the best of my knowledge, every chief executive in the union has the sole privilege of making these determinations on his or her own, based on some feedback from the community, just in conversation. I felt there was a need, and it was agreed upon for at least a few steps so that there'll be due diligence in terms of a quality system, a robust system for some type of quality control, so that there'll be opportunity for sufficient input, ma'am. Granted, each of the members are still a member of the cabinet, but at least there are two layers between the application and the governor. So, in the spirit of the framework that was established, it was meant to serve as an opportunity to ensure compliance and quality control along the way. And to the best of my recollection, and the spirit of what at least I was attempting to do, to have wholesome conversations and debate the merits of each application. That's what I believe to be true, at least from my perspective, ma'am. I don't speak for each member of the panel. And just for the record, the only decision that the panel through consensus or simple majority can make is which applications advance onto a list that go to the governor. The panel and neither member in their sole capacity can approve an application for award. Neither could the administrator of the program.
Thank you. And then just following up on the conflict of interest questions, is there a written conflict of interest policy anywhere that you could point to that governed this program and the decision-making process?
Thank you for the question. Not that I'm aware of.
And could you also help us understand, in the event that a panelist had to recuse themselves, why wouldn't somebody else who was representing that office then step in to assist in the decision making or in the review process?
Great question, ma'am. I don't believe I have an adequate answer for that. You're saying, like, if I conflicted myself out, why wouldn't my substitute be?
Right.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, the appointing authority can always replace me, perhaps if it was in my situation. But based on how it's been operating, we find that two or more members has been sufficient to conduct some type of due diligence in reviewing and discussing the application.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in your case, your appointing authority was the governor?
Is the governor, yes.
Okay. And then in the case of Secretary of Commerce, was he the only member of the panel that had, I guess, a substitute, as you put it, with Mr. Taisigui? Nobody else had a substitute.
I can't speak for the Secretary of Finance, but I don't have a substitute. But I don't. Yes, the short answer to that, ma'am, is yes.
Thank you. I yield.
And just to clarify, the Secretary of Commerce and Mr. Jesus Taisigui never sat in at the same time.
Gosh, I've sat in many conversations with both of them on other matters, so I'm trying to be as.
But in regards to the review process, in approving these applications, did both members get a vote on whether or not these?
Thank you. That is a very concise question. No, sir. Mr. Chairman, at no point, to the best of my recollection, did both members exercise equal voting privileges in the course of reviewing an application. Thank you for
Thank
for
you. So
making that
clarified.
concise.
Any other member? I recognize Rep. Staffler.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for being here this morning. I just wanted to follow up on a few other things that you've mentioned earlier. You said that there were no favoritism with respect to applications. So I'd like to ask evidence to please bring up the date 11/01, 1:56 p.m. on the same thing. So if you can go up more. Specifically with respect to communications between yourself and Ms. K, you ask specifically, Hoy, what is the name of your company? OM Grill? I don't see it listed. She responds, Oceans 5, LLC, DBA, Oh My Grill. So I'm curious, what was your intent in asking this kind of question?
Sure. So for the record, I didn't say no favoritism towards any application, but that is also true. I said there was specifically no favoritism towards the Bank of Saipan in the previous context. This, to the best of my knowledge, is Ms. Karen asking if I can look into her applications, if in fact those are her companies. And the best I can do in every instance, or not to be definitive, in almost every opportunity afforded to me, is advance the name of a company to the full panel for consideration. I, at no point in time, have any unilateral authority to place it on a list for consideration by the governor. That must be adopted by a majority of the panel. So I have many people, some of whom are related to people in this room, have asked me to look into it, and I've said I will try to get around to it. I would look for the packet, or if it's even listed, and then if I found it meritorious, advance it to the panel for its consideration, not for my sole consideration and action.
So notwithstanding the actual application itself and all of the documentation that was provided by every business, it also gave them a little up if they had an in with you? Is that what you're saying?
No, I wouldn't. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that she had asked me as an applicant if I would look into the status of her application.
Okay. With respect to the Boost program in general, seeing as you were a panelist and also one of the main organizers in reading all of the different communications, did you to ever take time or with the panel to review the final rules that were provided by the federal government with respect to this fund?
I'll answer that in a second. I just want to state for the record, since it's still up on the screen here, that I do not have a relationship with Miss Karen Kent, filial, professional, social, or otherwise, other than seeing her at the bank and having her ask me to inquire. Just want to make that clear. As a matter of fact, I stated earlier for the record, I didn't know who she was until I actually started participating in the Boost program, just for the record. Did I take the time to review the final rule? I may,
All 400 pages of it.
no ma'am, I did not read all 400 pages of the final rule.
Thank you, Zaji, for providing that earlier. Um, With respect to that, I think there are some concerns that could be had in the process that was described to us.
Sure.
If you had reviewed the final rule, you would see that the granting agency, which would be considered the CNMI government, should have um, zero, what's the word? Participation in the decision-making matters of this. And so with that, I ask, having the governor be the final authority on every application, would you say that is going with the regulations or against the regulations? Final rule.
Based on my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, I believe that the panel serves strictly as an advisory capacity to the governor. There are no decisions made by the panel. The governor is the ultimate authority. I would also defer to council, whether it's the governors or the individual agencies, to best answer that. I have been operating in good faith, and if there were any contradictions in terms of how we operate, the assumption is that we would be guided accordingly by legal counsel, whether from the bank or from the government itself. So I'm not aware, and I'm still have not been made aware of any conflicts of an existing federal regulation, law, rule, or otherwise.
Noted. I've had several community members who have applied for the Farmers, Fishermen, and Ranchers program, and they really are curious if they will be told if they're not approved or approved. Is there a place they can check if they are not approved?
Yes, ma'am. Any member of the community may contact the Bank of Saipan within their normal operating hours to inquire as to the status of their applications. To the best of my knowledge, no application, whether it's for fisher, farmer, rancher, small business, nonprofit, has been rejected. I would strongly encourage any member who's curious whether an applicant or not to contact the Bank of Saipan. And
Order.
Sorry, Mr. Zaji, please refrain from disrupting the hearing.
so for the record, again, the administrator of the Boost program is the Bank of Saipan. They would be the authority in terms of the status of one's application.
Thank you. I yield for now.
Thank you, Rep. Staffler. I recognize Rep. Probst.
Okay, so what I keep hearing is basically that we don't have we don't have really the say. It's the governor that has the final say. The governor has the final authority. The governor has the final say. So with that said, Mr. Castro, the governor also decides on the percentage that will be given out. Is that correct?
The governor has final authority on
Correct.
all things relative to Boost. Yes, sir.
Okay, but he determines the amount given.
He approves whatever has been stipulated, I guess, in the list.
So wait, so if he's just approving what you've already put forward, then you guys have a lot of say. He has final approval, but you guys are the one making the recommendation, and you're saying he's just rubber stamping it and just approving it, or does he disagree with you at times, and does he change it and say, "I think this company deserves more"?
To the best of my knowledge, at no point has the governor asserted himself to remove or add or otherwise amend the recommended amounts or listed names on the ledger.
Okay, so the governor may have the final say and the final authority, but he has, to your recollection, never made any changes to that. Therefore, as panelists, you guys make the recommendation as to how much a company or what companies are awarded and how much they will get, and he simply says approved. Is that correct?
It is correct that the panel makes a recommendation to the governor for final approval.
Okay, and he makes that approval based on what you guys put forward. Is that correct? I just want this for the record.
The governor, whatever the decision is the final authority.
We've been over that multiple times today. What I'm saying is that you guys put in the recommendation and then he approves it based on your recommendation and to your recollection and what you remember, he has not altered or changed it. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I believe that to be
Okay,
true.
so he's consistent in saying whatever you guys recommend, I approve it. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I believe that to be true.
Thank you. I wanted that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Probst. And for the record, the WhatsApp message that is displayed will be Exhibit 2. I recognize the co-chair.
Thank you, Chairman Magnolia. Mr. Castro, you mentioned earlier the three names of the review panel, which is yourself, representing the Office of the Governor. Is that correct?
Yes,
Is that a
ma'am.
correct statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Edward M. De Leon Guerrero from the Department of Commerce. He's the Secretary.
The Secretary of Commerce.
And
Yes,
on,
ma'am.
on occasion, he has delegated his review authority or approval authority to Mr. Jesus Taisagui, the Director of Business Development at the Department of Commerce as well.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the last one you mentioned would be Mr. David Actlick, the Secretary of Commerce. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you have also stated a few minutes ago that nobody has ever conflicted themselves out in the review process. Is that a correct assumption?
No.
Please correct me.
Yeah, I believe in the exchange with another representative. I did make the statement that, to the best of my knowledge and recollection, there has been a time when a member has recused himself from acting on an application. I believe I said that, and if I wasn't clear, let me restate that. That on occasion, to the best of my knowledge and recollection, there has been a member who has recused himself.
And who would that be?
I I can't recall from the multiple discussions that have ensued.
Okay, fair enough. So when one steps down due to a conflict, you also previously mentioned that nobody steps in and usually the rest of the panel just continues, right? Is that correct?
That is correct, ma'am.
So would you say that Mr. Shane Villanueva has ever sat on the review panel?
Shane Villanueva. The question is, has Shane Villanueva sat on a review panel? No, not to the best of my knowledge or recollection, ma'am.
Miss Selena Sapp?
Miss Selena Sapp and Mr. Shane Villanueva have never sat in a review panel.
Okay, Mr. Robert Travilla?
Mr. Robert Travilla, in addition to Selena Sapp and Mr. Shane Villanueva, have never sat on a review panel to the best of my knowledge.
Mr.
And
Perry
recollection.
Enos Jr.?
Mr. Perry Enos Jr.,
That's correct.
not to the best of my knowledge or recollection, neither of those four individuals have sat in a review panel.
Anybody else from the Bank of Saipan? You mentioned there were only 3,
There are 3 panelists, yes, ma'am.
so Bank of Saipan is not included in that.
No, ma'am. The Bank of Saipan is the administrator.
Okay. Anybody else from the government that you can recall?
Not to the best of my knowledge, ma'am.
Okay. Miss Nadine De Leon Guerrero?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Ned Pablo?
No, ma'am.
Datana?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Co-Chair. At this time, members, we've been at it for a little over or about an hour and a half. And so we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll be back at 11. Well, let's make it 11:50. Short recess. Prior to going on recess, we were along the lines of questioning in regards to recusal. So just for clarification, Mr. Castro, have you yourself ever recused yourself from the review process?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I myself have elected not to comment on one or more occasions when a specific application was before the panel.
Thank you.
Mr. Castro, do you recall which applications you refused to comment on as a review panel?
No, ma'am, but I would like to state for the record that I would choose not to comment on any questions on any specific applicant as advised by counsel, as it would be unfair to the applicant and approximately 4,000 other applicants across all boost programs. I'd like to further state for the record on the issue as to relationships, personal, professional, or otherwise, as it had arisen 3 times, that I do not recall any discussion during the review of any applications about any favors for a specific company. Further, I do not recall any discussion about an application on the basis of partisan affiliation, religious association, filial relationship, or the basis of race, color, gender, etc. for that matter. These factors are not a legitimate basis by which we evaluate the merit of a submission. In my humble opinion, the process is blind to these relationships.
So you're not willing to tell us, or this committee, which of the applicants you recused yourself from, potentially recused, or which ones you had influence on? Or do you not recall?
I don't recall which ones I recused myself, but even if I had it succinctly in my mind, I was advised by counsel not to comment on any specific application.
But you're a member of the review panel, and we're asking you about applicants. Why would your counsel advise that?
I'd have to ask him that, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, co-chair. Any other member? I recognize Rep. Sablon.
Thank you. And just to clarify, you said that you opted not to comment. Is that the same as recusing yourself?
In my opinion, yes, ma'am. Oftentimes, I try to the best of my ability to avoid or perceive even the perception of a conflict of interest.
Mhm. Okay. But you would not say, I am recusing myself from this discussion.
I don't recall.
And you would remain in the room. You wouldn't step out.
It's possible that the panel may have acted without my presence. That's always a possibility.
That's not the question. When you say, I opted not to comment, so to answer the question then, you did on occasion recuse yourself.
I have, on one or more occasions, to the best of my recollection, chose not to advocate for or opine on one or more applications.
Okay. And may I ask then, when the panel makes this decision, you mentioned there were decisions that were made on consensus. Was there an actual vote?
Yes, ma'am. There is the threshold, based on my experience, is when 2 or more members of the panel agree to the list that was generated by the panel. Yes.
Okay. But was there like a recorded vote?
Not to the best of my knowledge, ma'am.
And was there a record of recusals?
Not to the best of my knowledge and recollection, ma'am.
So how would any member of the public or member of this body, for that matter, how would we know that conflict of interest policies were properly adhered to, or that there was this quality control that you mentioned, and 2 or more members of the panel had reached a consensus to recommend an application? How do we know if there's no record? Where's the quality control in that?
Sure. So the manifestation of a decision by consensus is in the recordation of the list that's advanced to the governor, ma'am. And I think it's worth noting for the record that in almost all instances, in my experience, uh, at least for myself, I'm blind to who the principals of the entities are. Um, the applicants are not required to disclose the officers of the corporation. And based on my experience, almost always there is a singular authorized signatory. And that's pretty much all that there is that I'm able to discern by reading the application.
Mhm.
So unless each member would declare that there is a conflict of interest, I'm not able to perceive that on the face of the application. So
I,
the question, the answer would be any recommendations are made manifest in the list that's ultimately approved by the governor.
mhm. Okay, but there is no record of either recusals or voting decisions of the panel, just to be clear. For
To the
record.
best of my knowledge, there are no minutes taken of these deliberations.
And may I ask why not?
I don't speak for the panel, but my assumption is to avoid any perceived, uh, to protect the panelists from any type of retribution if they were advocating for or against a particular vendor or, or applicant in this regard.
So the
But that's my
decision not
assumption, ma'am.
the decision not to keep records was deliberate?
No, there is a record of applications that have been advanced to the governor for approval, and that's
I
made
understand
manifest. Yeah.
that. But the decision not to keep meeting minutes, not to keep voting records, not to keep records of conflict of interest, recusals, that was a deliberate policy call to protect the panelists?
No, I wouldn't say it's a policy call. I'm one member of a three-member panel. I'm not the
Mhm.
chairman, nor am I the signatory or the authority on the administration of the program. I'm a participant in the process,
Who
but
devised this framework for review?
uh, it was by consensus of members of the panel and ultimately approved by the governor. You're talking about the process?
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the decision not to keep records, who made that decision?
I don't recall that it was a decision. I certainly didn't make a overt decision and motion not to have minutes, but um, I can't recall somebody made a decision not to keep minutes of a meeting.
Mhm. And if there are no records that are kept, then, like, what ultimately is a governor actually reviewing and approving?
A list as advanced by the panel for his consideration and approval
So
of
he just, all
applications.
he sees is a list.
He sees
All
a,
he knows about is a list and a number assigned to each of those applicants.
he he is in receipt of a ledger that contains the name of the app, the date of the submission, the name of the applicant, the amount requested, and the recommended amount to be awarded if approved. Yes.
Um, Thank you.
Well, I have a question
I
for the
will
witness.
yield
Why
on
was
this
that
one.
ledger not provided to this committee?
The list of approvals?
Whatever you advanced to the governor, why was it not provided to this committee?
If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Arroyo has provided the list as approved by the governor, and it's reflected in a ledger. Um, as a matter of fact, I randomly picked out through the stack here. Um, it, this is taken from Mr. Arroyo's submission to the legislature, and it usually is advanced in this type of a format and would say this list has been reviewed and recommended to the governor for approval. The governor has approved this list. I believe Mr. Arroyo, as the administrator of the program, is the official keeper of the record. These questions would best be answered by him as the administrator in his capacity.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, has there been any instances where more than one member would have to recuse himself from the approval process?
Great question, Mr. Chairman. Not to the best of my knowledge and recollection.
Okay. Thank you. I recognize Rep. Ropes.
Um, Thank you, Mr. Castro. We've reviewed this list of applications and we've done our own homework. I've looked at them and very easy to find out who is who, what businesses are owned by who. I think it's a little shocking, maybe upsetting, maybe troubling. I don't know what word you want to use when we have many businesses that applied with the hope of getting some sort of help. And then they find out that there are some businesses that are under a particular person, for example, that received not maybe one, not two, but maybe 4 or 5 boost grants. And the amounts are staggering when we actually look into the company or the business and the amount that was given, the percentage that was given. And I say this, Mr. Castro, let's just get on with this. Let me ask you this question. With regard to the governor's assistance for businesses during COVID, not, let's forget about Boost for now. You have been the chief of staff. What assistance did the office of the governor give to small businesses in the CNMI during COVID?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. On or around September of 2021, I assumed the role as chief of staff. And forgive me for not having uh, the prior knowledge of any business initiatives prior to that date. I am not aware of any, to the best of my knowledge, other than Boost that was
you.
initiated around the spring of 2022.
I
sir.
appreciate that. And so Boost was something that gave hope to many of these businesses. And I say this because these businesses, many of them closed down during COVID. And a lot of us know that because places we used to shop at or eat at were closed down because they couldn't survive because of COVID. And the troubling thing about this, Mr. Castro, is the fact that there was some semblance of hope for COVID. I mean, during this time of COVID, and it was the economic injury disaster loan, the COVID-19 economic injury disaster loan, EIDL. There were several businesses in the CDMI that applied for this loan. And they did it because that was the only hope. That was their only hope to survive the pandemic and keep their business afloat. Many of these businesses took on a loan. It was not a gift, it was not a grant, it was a loan from the federal government, and they had to pay it back. Many of them struggled to pay it back, suffered. And now we're at the end of the pandemic and these boost programs are being thrown out. Many of them that got the EIDL, and in order to get this loan, by the way, you have to be properly vetted. I mean, you have to be a legitimate business. You can't have a passive income. You can't just be an apartment rental or something small. You actually have to have a legitimate business. Getting back to that, the EIDL, they got these loans, and several of them who got the EIDL applied for Boost in hopes of getting some sort of help, something finally that can help them out. But the ones that I've spoken to, many of them, almost all of them that came to me and talked to me about this, have not received anything. And these are legitimate businesses that were open during COVID. If you were to look for something that you wanted to vet companies properly, all you had to do was look no further than who took out EIDLs. That would be the simplest thing to do. And what's shocking even more so through all of this conversations or this hearing this morning is that we have the Bank of Saipan, who is the administrator. They put together a system, and then we have the panelists who review it. But the panelists are they loan specialists? Are they bankers? Do they have experience in all of this? It's you, which is the chief of staff. It's the secretary of finance, David Attilik. It's the Department of Commerce's Ed Delanguro or Jess Tysagui, possibly other people. But that's it. And all of you are appointees by the governor. But as you had mentioned several times today, he has the final say. Just in complete fairness and transparency, if the governor really wanted to make this a best program, why wouldn't he simply talk to his Council of Economic Advisors and say, hey guys, I don't want to make this political, but I need your help in making this something that be fantastic. I don't need to be in all the photo ops. We need to help out these programs. But that was not the case. That's not what we have seen. And at the end of the day, when all of this, after all of this talk, what we will review and what we have been reviewing is those who have received the 241 businesses. There are several of them that there are conflicts, and that we are happy to talk about later on, perhaps after lunch. And we also would like explanations as to how some of these businesses that just were startups that didn't even exist during COVID got incredible amounts of money. Nonprofit organizations that didn't even exist during COVID suddenly got the tons of money. You can understand why there are a lot of people upset, why a lot of our constituents have come to all of us and have questioned this Boost program. It wasn't us dreaming this up thinking that we have issues with Boost. No, it was our constituents who are business owners that came to us. So, Mr. Castro, please understand, there is a great deal of frustration from the legitimate small businesses who have been struggling, who have also closed down, who have not gotten a penny. And I also find it upsetting. I'm just going to say this for the comment. It's not a question, for the record. But I find it ridiculous when we hear from everything that we've looked through earlier that says we have never denied anyone. Mr. Castro, I think that is almost insulting to our intelligence to say that, because the fact is, when you are reviewing 200 applications all in a row, you're going to approve some and put some aside. Now, you may not have told them they were denied, but if they were put aside or put to the bottom of the barrel, they in essence were denied, even though you may not have told them or broken it to them that they did not receive the boost. So that's the things I wanted to say before we break for lunch. I didn't have any questions. Those were my comments for the record. I don't expect any answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Probst. Any other member? Recognize Culture.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Castro, were any businesses and or nonprofits who had incomplete packages advanced to the governor for his signature or approval?
Not to the best of my knowledge, ma'am.
Thank you. And you mentioned that you were advised by your counsel. I don't see a counsel here. Who is your counsel on record?
So yesterday, if I may,
Sure.
I was struggling with this conversation about providing all documentation versus documentation about, and then I got wrapped around.
And as you know, we've been
I
very
understand.
accommodating.
I
and-
understand, and I was frustrated with the issue of this Blake stamp. But the point is, I reached out to Gil. Could I get some technical guidance from a lawyer?
Sure.
Gil reached out to the Office of the Attorney General, and according to the governor's attorney, Gil Bernbach, that it's been authorized. And so I reached out to Mr. Colin Thompson, and he's currently obligated at the moment, but hopefully should free up this afternoon. So
Mr. Colin Thompson, you said?
Colin, yes, ma'am. So I'm hoping that he would agree and provide legal guidance on areas that I'm uncertain of or how best to proceed. So,
But Mr. Bernbrick is the counsel for the Office of the Governor, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And why would he not be your counsel? Why would he need outside counsel?
Oh gosh, I don't know how to answer that, but I do know that he encouraged me, or that others have encouraged me to, I forgot the acronym, request for legal I don't know, RFRL.
It's a form, yes. of the
Request for
Attorney
legal
General's office, I
representation,
think.
something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, co-chair. Any other member?
May I make a clarification? So it is your testimony today that no applicants who have incomplete packages have never been advanced to the governor by the panelists yourself, including yourself, Mr. David Atalik, Mr. Edward De Leon Guerrero, Mr. Jesus Taisui. Incomplete applications have never been advanced.
No,
Is that correct?
no, if I may, the specific question was to have any, I think it was nonprofit applications been advanced, and
No, both businesses. I said, were there any businesses and or nonprofits that had incomplete packages advanced to the governor?
so I am, okay, to be clear, yes, ma'am, I am aware of one or more applications that were advanced, that were caught eventually and pulled back, um, that had made it to the governor, but then through further review, whether it's the administrator in their due diligence figured, hey, we're missing a couple items. And naturally, the panel, or at least myself, I recorded that, said, well, then we need to come back to the table, because it's been a personal observation of mine in my capacity, sole capacity as a member, that I don't espouse the advancement of an incomplete package, ma'am.
So it was not approved. You said it was pulled back, so it was not approved by the governor.
I don't recall, but I would suspect it went up and then came back. Now, whether he put his stamp on, well, whether he said it's approved or it was caught before he approved, I'd have to refer to the record or defer to the administrator. But I do know there were one or more instances where it was deficient, and we had to convene to address that.
Thank you. I'll yield for now.
Recognize the vice chair.
Thank you, Chair. So just for the record, you yourself personally have never gave instructions, perhaps, to move forward with an application that was incomplete for processing.
To the best of my knowledge, I have never directed or otherwise forcefully advocated for an incomplete package to be advanced. If it was incomplete, it was either I overlooked it, but I didn't not knowingly advance a packet to the best of my knowledge that was missing an element or two or three. There's usually a checklist, or sometimes it is possible. I have experienced this, maybe not with a packet that I felt strongly about or I thought it was a great idea, but there have been examples of packets that may have been complete but were not, through human error, and I think the administrator can attest to this. It's his staff that have not been recorded, on the ledger that I mentioned that's advanced, and I could see easily how this happens. There are literally thousands of applications and 1,500 small business, but let's use small business as an example. It is possible, and it has happened, that a small business would submit an incomplete application so that they can submit the supplemental material, as there may be a backlog, perhaps in Department of Finance or Revenue Tax on the clearances, right? And then they would submit that supplemental information online, but the system, the staff, internal staff or otherwise that are assigned to go back and insert it, that it hasn't taken its time. So they didn't say that it was complete, or the reverse is true. I mean, I could probably be a little off, but that happens on occasion, ma'am.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. We'll break for lunch shortly. I just have one clarifying question, or a few actually. Were you involved in the process of the setting up the requirements or for businesses to apply? What is needed and all of that?
Yes, sir. I provided input to the process. Yes.
So how would the panel determine whether a company has less than 250 employees or makes less than 10 million in receipts when none of the requirements include stuff like financial statements or something of that sort?
That's a great question, sir. To the best of my knowledge, you're right. There is no explicit checklist that asks you to denote whether you gross 20 million or less or have 250 employees or less. So I can't speak for the others, but you're right. I admittedly, I would have to discern that by reading the packet, and most often than not, it's evident on its face. The packets that I've seen, based on what I've read, uh, fall very easily within that category. But there is opportunity for me to make a misjudgment. But based on my discernment and review of the record as submitted, I don't believe that any of the corporations that have been awarded, to the best of my knowledge, have grossed 20 million or more or have 250 employees or more.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
We'll close after co-chair.
Thank you, Chair. By the way, the threshold, according to what was, what
Is it
the
10 million?
chairman was alluding to is not 20 million,
It's
it's
10.
10 million. If that were the case, and you said it, you pretty much could tell at face value that these companies don't earn that much, how is it that the Bank of Saipan, the administrator of this boost program, was able to receive $250,000 in boost grant? It's not their administrative fee. They were listed as a recipient and awardee of this boost program. Who and how did you guys make that determination?
All applications that come through for review are discussed by the panel. I don't recall at any time that it was stated that the bank grosses more than 10 million a year or has 250 employees or more. Um, so I can't recall, to the best of my ability, having that raised as an issue, but I can tell you from my personal observation that I don't believe the Bank of Saipan has 250 employees, but I could be wrong. But that's just my judgment based on my observation, ma'am.
Okay, that's a fair assessment maybe, but the 10 million, I mean, any bank could easily gross that in receipts. But anyways, I don't expect an answer to that. I will yield to the chairman.
Exception. We'll have one last follow-up.
Thank you. I'm just curious, who reviewed the Bank of Saipan boost application to send it to the review panel?
I'd say all members of the panel had equal opportunity to comment on the recommendation.
But I mean, even before the review panel step, right? Bank of Saipan as the administrator reviews all applications or submissions for that come in to the bank, right? To ensure compliance and completeness, and they verify everything. So who reviewed Bank of Saipan's application?
I'd say, I'm speaking for myself, but based on my recollection, each member of the panel had equal opportunity to review and discuss the recommendation to include the Bank of Saipan as as a recipient of boost awards, of a boost award.
Did Bank of Saipan review their own submission prior to forwarding their name on a list to the review panel?
That's a great question. I do not have the answer to that one.
You don't know who reviewed Bank of Saipan's application?
In terms of the 5 points for submission,
Mhm.
your specific question was, do I know if the Bank of Saipan reviewed its own application? I don't have the answer to that.
And you don't know who did then? If
That is correct, to the best of my knowledge and recollection.
Thank you for clarifying that. I yield.
All right. Thank you for that. We will pick up at around 1:30, and so we'll take a lunch recess, and we'll be back at 1:30 p.m. Thank you.